Hi, and welcome to session 6 of Elevate Your Wellbeing Contagious Care. And it's lovely to have you here today, especially on this Anzac Day. It's a commemorative day, and I appreciate you taking the time out to actually be here. So please give a wave or a thumbs up or a love heart if you are watching in today, because it's wonderful to celebrate the fact that whatever we have done this morning on Anzac Day, in remembering what's been going on and what has happened in the past, I thought, whoa, this topic today is so relevant for what is happening in the current situation. And yeah, I couldn't have chosen a more apt topic today. So please give a wave or a thumbs up. Let me know you're there. And for those who were here last session, session 5, when we looked at the 4 predictors of divorce, I want you to ask yourself, even if you're not married or in that situation at all, choose the horseman that you most readily identify with, that brings you unstuck. We all hop on a horseman at different times in our lives. And for those of you who missed out on last session, just briefly, the 4 horsemen are that of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So we'll go into that further as we look at the antidotes today, but ask yourself and just type in the comments, what horseman do you most readily identify with? And what are the triggers that help you move into that particular horseman position so quickly? So just type in the comment section now what you've discovered about that. What's the horseman? Do you move into criticism so easily with people, or contempt, feeling a bit of superiority and feeling like you want to insult them? Or do you feel like you're moving into defensiveness or stonewalling? What do you most identify with, and what triggers you into moving into that horseman, hopping onto that horse, even if it's just a little pony or a rocking horse? Click in with the comments now on what you identify most closely with. So, hi Margaret and Carol and Peter and Paddy. Lovely to have you here all today, and Leisha. So put in those comments what you identify mostly with there, because I was reflecting with Anzac Day as we're reminded as a country, when we're further physically apart, but we're emotionally more close as we battle a shared silent adversity of COVID. And we remember all the past sacrifices today that people have made in our country that we are indeed grateful for. Last time when we looked at the 4 horsemen and the way they damage relationships if they're not controlled, I was thinking of what a parallel it is with those 4 horsemen, how it's described in the Bible, in the Revelation, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, how it brought disease and famine and destruction, and how it's interesting that the wars and conflicts between nations have many of these similar characteristics, that many of those 4 horsemen come as a common trigger. First of all, there's criticism of the other country, the verbal attacks, the insulting that happens, and we don't need to name anyone, we know who does that very frequently. And it's insulting the personality and the character of different nations. And then there's a sense of contempt, that second horseman that we were identifying with last session. You know, countries can think, our country's better. We can look at ourselves with a sense of superiority. Oh, they're different to us. So their customs and beliefs, we look at them as being subhuman and not to be respected. And so there's a tendency to insult and blame or abuse. And then there's that horseman, the third horseman of defensiveness. Any comments from the other country are seen as being a perceived attack, and so we'll defend ourselves quickly, and then it quickly deteriorates into a worse situation. And then we think that good and right is on our side and that the other side has no value or values at all. So we have that perception very clearly. And then finally, the last horseman is that of stonewalling, and strong walls are built up within countries. And there's a withdrawal from any attempt to try and reconcile. And behind that strong stone wall, then there's weapons that are quietly built, and then the build-up of aggression towards each other. So many of these antidotes that we are looking at today within our primary relationship of marriage and in other relationships of close connection that we're going to talk about today, they apply equally to our nation and the way countries relate to each other. And I was thinking last night as I was just reflecting on this, how if we get our relationships right at the core primary level, in our marriages, in our relationship with our children, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, then that has the ripple effect in our countries. And so it's really important, the effect of what is in our inner well-being and our attitude can have an incredibly constructive effect on the community and our nation in the long term, or it can have a completely destructive effect. So hi Renee and Carol and Karen and Kayla and Kristen, welcome here. And if you can all just write down, what horseman do you think you most readily identify with? Do you tend to hop on that horse of criticism? Do you tend to go out there and be sarcastic and cynical and have that contemptuous attitude? Do you tend to defend yourself like you're in a court of law and having to ward off any correction that you might have had to be corrected on in a relationship? Or do you stonewall and just give up and say, I'm out of here, and just, give up? So, hi, welcome Melinda. I like your interesting link with the nations, the value of getting relationships right on a local level and impacting the global level. Thank you, Melinda. So please type in where you tend to hop on, what horseman. Because you see, the good news today is that as we look at the antidotes, the things that are going to cure us getting onto those horsemen, we can accept and acknowledge that all relationships, even the most successful ones, have conflict. It's unavoidable. And the research shows that it's not the appearance of conflict that is the problem at all, but it's rather how we deal with it, how it's managed, that is key. And that predicts whether the relationship is going to be successful or not, how well we manage the conflict. So first of all, we need to identify it. And I talk about management of conflict rather than conflict resolution, because there are some issues in conflict that will never be resolved. Personality, characteristics in each other that we just have to accept. They're not ones that can be changed, and it's more temperament. And when they clash, they're conflicts that we'll just need to work on and grow in the way we manage them. So I like the word manage much better than resolution. We can aim for resolution with a lot of things, but sometimes we just need to accept we're managing this well, we're doing okay. So the first step, as we talked about before, is to identify and counteract that problem. We looked at identifying where we can go wrong last session, and we're going to look at the counteractions today. And I'm just going to look at these wonderful responses. Hi, Marie. Great to have you here. Leisha's saying, I have to fight not to defend myself so I can accept responsibility and admit fault. I have to work at not defending myself. Lovely, Leisha. Thank you. And that's a really good one, to be able to take responsibility and admit fault. That's what we're looking at today with one of the horsemen. Kayla's saying, I think I might start on the defensive horse. That's when he gets tired. I hop on the stone walling horse. Good insight, Kayla. And Margaret, wanting to defend myself from any hurt. So I very quickly try to justify my behavior, but I'm learning to look back at my behavior. Well done, Margaret. Thank you for your wonderful wisdom and insights there. Hi, Karen, and Marie's saying, I think I swap between a few different horses sometimes. We sure do. But it's helpful to look at what we tend to hop on the most, because then these antidotes are going to really be great medicine for you. So let's look at the first one, the antidote to criticism. And the antidote to criticism is simply a gentle startup. When we tend to move into criticizing, remember, we are criticizing the whole person, their character, rather than just making a simple complaint about an actual situation or event or a specific behavior. So the antidote for criticism is to use a soft and gentle startup. Avoid saying you, those you messages, you're always lazy. You can never pick up your clothes off the floor. The words never and always are just out of bounds, okay? And we need to look at a soft, gentle startup like I feel, okay? So when we're looking at problems, if we can start up with I feel and what I need, okay? And if you can have the attitude of aiming for what do I want at the end of this conversation? How do I want it to look? And I often, when I'm giving feedback to John or the children, I try and visualize how I want us to be at the end. And it's like hugging. It's hugging each other at the end. A beautiful, warm connection and feeling closer than we were before. So visualizing that really, really helps. How you want to see it at the end. Steve Covey, who wrote a book on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about starting with the end in mind. So visualize the end in mind of your conversation when you're giving feedback. That's key to start with the attitude. And then to start by saying, instead of you statements like, you never listen to me, I've told you 1,000 times, you never follow through with what we've agreed upon. Remember the example I gave you last session with John and myself. Instead, I could say, honey, I feel discouraged when you don't follow through with what we've talked about and what we've agreed upon. I feel unheard and then devalued. And what I need is for you to follow through on what we've agreed upon. So I cut it down into how I feel, and then I need. And it's really important when you're in that conversation to be able to just share what you feel. I'm going to do an exercise later down the track that looks at how the person responds to that in a way that just makes it gold. Okay, but we'll look at that in a different session just so we can keep on task for today. So no blame or criticism. It's just a soft, gentle startup. What I feel and what I need. And then to end it with a request. And what I'd really appreciate is if you could put those really stinky clothes in the dirty clothes basket down in the laundry. Okay, a request at the end. I feel, I need, and then that simple request. So let's look at some of your responses. I'm quick to accept fault and apologize even when I'm not at fault. Kristen, thank you. And Karen, I always think it's my fault. Well, we'll look at that because sometimes it won't be your fault, Karen. And Julie, welcome here. And Amanda, welcome again. And Karen, I sometimes feel lost and it's my fault. So let's look at that second horseman and we'll get through some of these responses as well. The antidote to contempt, which was the second horseman. For those of you who didn't get to see the first session, just go back on replay when you have a chance, because this session today will so much more make sense when you've listened to when you've watched the first one on replay. So with contempt, the antidote is to build a culture of appreciation and respect. Let's just summarize contempt again. It shows up in statements when we have that position of moral superiority. Examples of sarcasm and cynicism and name-calling and rolling your eyes and sneering and having that mockery and hostile humor. Okay? That's what contempt is. It's destructive and really defeating. And it's the greatest horseman that predicts the 94% accuracy in divorce. So it's really important to just eradicate that pattern of behavior. So this is key for us all. Building a culture of appreciation and respect. Now, often, if you regularly express appreciation, gratitude to your partner, you'll create a positive perspective in your mind of them, and then that will flow on into the relationship. The more positive you feel, the less likely you are to be acting contemptuously. Okay? So it's eradicating those negative feelings. And we'll go into this in more detail when we look at our own well-being in other sessions in future weeks. But another way we can explain this is that the discovery that the John Gottman Institute found with the 5-to-1 ratio. And what that is that every successful relationship has a need to have the five affirmations, whether they be compliments, sharing laughter together, having connection, positive connection times together, sharing a joke with each other, doing jigsaw puzzles together, which you might be doing now. It warms the emotional bank account. It fills that up. And so we need, to make a successful relationship, you need 5 of those different things, whether it's hugs, kisses, just gentle touches, just, hey, you look lovely today, honey, or having a joke about something that could have ended up in a trigger, but you could have a joke about it warmly with each other and counteract that. Those sorts of things are really positive, and every successful relationship needs 5 of them to counteract one negation. A negation can be a rolling of the eyes or name calling or just being difficult with each other or negative in some way. So isn't it interesting? 5-to-1 ratio. When I heard this research a couple of decades ago, I thought, my gosh, it really challenged me. It's not worth even having one negative to have to make up 5 positives. So really count the maths there when you think about that. So it's the antidote to contempt. If we can remember to show appreciation, affection, respect, kindness, politeness, all of those wonderful attributes. So I know in, what the Bible talks about, what love is: kind, gentle, speaking the truth, having respect, gratitude for each other, a gentle spirit, a kind heart, just the fruits of the Spirit are wonderful ways to go back to remember what this appreciation is, and creating a warm environment that creates goodwill, long-term goodwill in the end, that stores up your healthy emotional bank account. So how do we show this to each other? The antidote to contempt in the short term is what I've already mentioned about saying how you feel. I feel this and I need this. Sitting down with your partner, timing is everything, choose it wisely. But I'm feeling disappointed, or on an issue with punctuality, instead of saying you're always late, you could say, it's really important to me to be on time, honey. Can you please help me with that so we can actually get to places on time together? You see how so different that is, okay? So that's the short-term antidote to contempt, and the long-term antidote to contempt is building that culture of fondness, appreciation, and admiration. And that can't happen just like that overnight. It needs to be intentionally done in small increments. Lots of small things are good. Just little stones building up, like, you know, the lovely little rocks that you see when you hike and you get up to the top of places. Everyday little things that you can create to make that a safe haven for you in your home. Once you've created it, it will act as a consistent boundary against contempt. So talking about the happy events of the past is really helpful too. John used to always go down, if we were having an issue, we'd take some time out, and then he'd always go down to his study and he'd look at this photo of us when we were dating. Okay, yeah, long time ago. He looks like Chris Christopherson for those oldies like myself. If you don't know Chris Christopherson, he looks like the new Bradley Cooper, doesn't he? But anyway, yeah, he used to go down to his study, look at this old photo of us as we were dating, and it was just a sense of reminding him of all the wonderful memories we have stored up in our sentimental, emotional bank account. And that really helps then to go forward. And he'd just put his headphones on, listen to nice music. I'd go for a walk around the block, and then we'd come back in 20 minutes and resolve. Okay? So it's really good to have that space, and I'll talk about that as the fourth antidote to stonewalling. So we've looked at the antidote to criticism. We've looked at the antidotes to contempt. And there's many antidotes to contempt that I would like you to think about, all that creativity of how you can create a culture of respect, admiration, and fondness in your world with your most beautiful, precious relationships. How can you create those positive thoughts of each other, which will then create positive feelings and help to heal any wounds that have occurred? So, the third antidote to the third predictor is defensiveness. Okay? The horseman of defensiveness. So, as I think it was, whose response was it? It was a great response from Leisha in accepting responsibility and acknowledging that where I have been at fault in certain areas. And good on you, Leisha, because that is the primary antidote to defensiveness. So when we hop on that horseman of defensiveness, it's about self-protection, okay? But what you can, it's understandable that we want to self-protect, but what it can become then is a righteous indignation. And we move into a rigid position of what I call innocent victimhood. And who's innocent? We've all done things wrong. But that innocent victimhood we move into to try and ward off a perceived attack. And many people become defensive when they are being criticized, okay? It hooks into the first horseman of criticism. But the problem is when we get into that mode of defensiveness, it never works, okay? It never solves the problem at hand, because defensiveness is really a way of blaming your partner. It's like taking off the things that you have just had put on you and saying, I'm not going to own any of it. And so we throw it all out. And the important thing is to know that defensiveness is a way of blaming your partner. Okay? You're saying that the problem isn't me, it's all about you. And as a result, the problem's not resolved and the conflict just escalates. So the antidote is to accept responsibility for what you could have done that set it off in the first place, how you contributed to the problem. Just find little ways. If you think you're totally innocent, I just encourage you, I challenge you to look for little ways. Did you raise your voice? Did you just, walk away when your partner wanted to speak to you? Did you not show warmth? Just find some ways that you could have contributed to the problem. Because by taking responsibility to be part of the conflict, even while, you might think in your mind that your partner's done it all, you're actually saying, we're a team in this, we want to work it out together. And you could even just have that attitude of, hey, I want to listen to you, I want to hear you out, because I want for us to be able to manage this. I really want to be able to come to a place where we can be on the same side again. So take responsibility, accept your partner's perspective as you listen to it. Just hold on to your stuff, put it down on the ground, literally place it, pretend this is your stuff and this is your partner's stuff. So your partner's holding on to his stuff, say. And while you're listening to his stuff, let him hold his container of different things that he wants to bring out. It's interesting, it's not garbage, these are my business cards. Okay, I've just dumped in here to do this little exercise. So what is it? Represents something that's important to you. So it's important to your partner if he's got it in his container. So let it stay there as he expresses what's going on for him. And you put your stuff down on the floor, literally. It's a good thing to have a container. I encourage couples to have a container each. And I've worked with couples in the therapy room on this, and they just find it so helpful when they get to home and they pick up their container, because only one person in the interaction can hold the container at the one time. So when you put down your container, you are saying, I'm not going to bring up my stuff right now. All I'm going to do is listen and reflect back what I'm hearing you say, that active listening approach. And that will help you not be defensive. It's the number one antidote to defensiveness, to actually listen, put down your stuff, reflect back what you've heard, and then you'll have a chance to pick up your stuff when your partner says he feels heard. And if he wants to be obstinate, don't carry that on for, an hour. Okay. Be honest about when you feel heard by your partner. Okay. So try that container exercise. Let me hear your feedback on that to see if you think that would work for you, because I've seen hundreds and hundreds of couples finding that a really constructive way to just not be defensive. It helps them to do something in the interaction, to just hold their thumb, remember, and sit and listen by putting their stuff down on the floor until they have really truly heard their partner. And you can't be defensive as you start doing that. Okay, so take responsibility, accept your partner's perspective as you've listened to it. You might not agree with it, that's okay, but accept it as being real and true for them. And then if you've noticed that you've done any wrongdoing as you've listened to them, then be quick to apologize. Hey? Know that you want to restore this situation, so offer an apology when you can for your part in the problem. So, the last antidote to the fourth horseman, which is stonewalling. Let me hear your responses as you're coming in. Marie has said, I love the idea of the memories stored away in the emotional bank account. I suppose this is like the old talking stick, Heather. It sure is. Some people use the pen or the talking stick, but I really like the containers because you have to, you know that your partner's got stuff in here, and you know that your stuff will be valued when it's your time to speak. So that's why I use the containers. I find it a much more helpful approach because you can actually put your stuff down while you're listening to your partner's stuff, and you can embrace your partner's stuff more then. Okay, so with stonewalling, remember stonewalling, and go back to session 5 so you can really get a grip on this, on these 4 predictors of divorce, because it's so worthwhile knowing them. John Gottman had over 30 years of research he's done on this. I had the privilege of sitting down having lunch with him about a decade ago now, and quizzing him on a number of things, and it was just such a privilege to meet him. But look up his work, the Gottman Institute, Dr. John Gottman Institute, because it's done some marvelous work on this area, and I'm indebted to his research, which has proved 94% accuracy with thousands and thousands of couples over 30 years of longitudinal studies. So what he found with stonewalling is this. Now, first of all, I'll just remind you what stonewalling is. It's when someone completely withdraws from conflict. And those people who are conflict runners, put your hands up, identify it, own it, and name it so that you can lean in towards your partner then. We can't do anything different if we don't name it in the beginning. So if you run from conflict, own it and say, hey, yes, I am a withdrawer. I no longer want to run away from conflict. I can accept it as being a normal, natural part of life. But if you tend to withdraw, it's because you're feeling flooded. You're feeling so emotionally overwhelmed. And most people do feel emotionally overwhelmed if they've had criticism, contempt coming their way. Okay? It's a natural response for those people. Will either be on the horseman of defensiveness, tend to, or to stonewall. But we need to hop off both, because stonewalling is the next highest predictor of divorce after contempt. And so it's really important that when we're feeling flooded and overwhelmed, emotionally overwhelmed, which is what leads to stonewalling, your reaction is to shut down, stop talking, disengage. The problem is when you do that under a lot of emotional pressure, your heart rate increases, and your heart rate will just go haywire, and you can't even speak. That's what happens when you're emotionally flooded. So that's why people check out. Okay. The important thing is to stop ourselves from doing that by a simple action, and it's this. Honey, we need to take a break. This isn't working. I'm feeling emotionally overwhelmed. Let's take 20 minutes out and see how we feel after that. You may need longer, you may need 30 minutes. But John Gottman's research showed, and he did this with hundreds of couples, this particular exercise where he said to couples who were having challenges, real fighting in their relationships in this love lab where they're all wired up to electronics to gauge their heart rate, etc., and wired up. And so when they were in conflict, what he said, he pretended that all the equipment had broken down. So he said, guys, you need to take a break. And he gave them a 20-minute break. And he said to them, read these magazines, just read any magazines, just do what you need to do in this time, just relax. That's all he said. He offered the magazines and said you can relax. Do you know what happened to all those couples? When they came back in 20 minutes and started talking again, they were having fights, okay? They were in conflict. But when they came back, when he said, hey, the equipment's fixed up now, their heart rates were significantly lower. Their interaction was much more positive and much more productive. And we know it as common sense, But I'm just telling you the science to help you to kick in that reaction, that response, that chosen response further. So why is that the case with all this research? It's obvious to us, isn't it, that when they took that break, they were able to psychologically soothe themselves in the way they needed to. They just read whatever they wanted to read and they avoided discussion. They calmed down, and once they felt calm, they were able to return to the discussion in a respectful and a rational way. So this is why that taking a break and saying it, that you need a break kindly, is the approach to self-soothing. You need to self-soothe on your own. And you can see how the approach of I just need to have a break now is different to slamming a door and walking away. That's not having a break. That is stonewalling and being contemptuous at the same time. Okay, so just saying, hey, honey, and some people have these stop signs that I have in my therapy room. Some people have made them for themselves to just say, hey, we need this right now. Or some people use humor. It's the best thing you can do at that time. You might use a word that just alerts you to needing that 20-minute break. Okay. Hi, Alison, and hi, Monica. You've just popped in and it's great to have you here. So we're just finishing off the fourth a predictor of divorce and looking at the antidote to that, which is taking a break when we're experiencing ourselves stonewalling or our partner stonewalling. So when you've taken the break, at least 20 minutes, because that's what the Institute has said is vital. It has to be 20 minutes. You will calm down. And the crucial thing then is in that 20-minute time, it might be a walk around the block. It might be doing yoga. It might be praying. It might be going to your source of soothing, whatever that is for you. We'll all have a different approach. If you're a physical person, it might be sprinting around the block. But it's important to reflect on some positive memories of the past rather than what you're irritated about your partner in that moment. Just put all those feelings and thoughts aside, okay? Just put them in the garbage bin for now. Throw them over the cliff and focus on some other things or that's completely different from your partner. And what I tend to do, what I find the most helpful, is to remind myself, it's a Bible verse that talks about admonishing one another with all wisdom. And all admonish means is, when you're giving feedback to each other, remember, I feel and I need. You'll be able to come back to that when you've had a break and received some wisdom. So I go to my source of anchoring, which happens to be God, and I find some beautiful music that is helpful. I'll go for a walk, listen to some gorgeous music, and just soothe myself. Go out on the headland, find a spot, look at old photos if you don't live in lovely scenery, but just you can visualize it as you meditate. But having that break, you can come back with wisdom. But we can't have that wisdom if we're still in that fighting mode. So a really helpful antidote is to self-soothe. And that is something that we'll look at later on how we can do that in very practical ways. We'll look at that in detail next week as we look at the inner aspects of our own well-being. We've focused on relationships these last 2 weeks through COVID because we're in tight, confined space. The next 2 weeks we'll be looking, and we'll be weaving in and out of relationships as well, but we'll be looking at our inner well-being and how we can help ourselves to elevate that well-being as we look at self-soothing in a whole lot more detail. So in summary today, I want to just help remind us all that marriages, as any relationship, goes through stages. There's highs and lows. There's times in the desert. There's times we don't want to be in the desert for very long, I know, but in all that dryness. But there's times in paradise too. And when we are in the desert, remember to reflect on the times of paradise you've had. And, you know, perhaps some of you might have even seriously considered divorcing or distancing from your partner, but you've hung in there. And while I just want to encourage you with something that when I was on a scholarship in the States, I met with a different researcher who interviewed a sample of couples who rated their marriage as pretty miserable. And they weren't abusive or threatening, but they were still pretty miserable, couples who weren't connected, and they were generally unhappy. And 5 years later, he went back and interviewed these same couples again. And with the passage of time, some had had therapy, but some hadn't. And with the passage of time, 72% said, boy, am I glad we waited, we hung in there, we're going so much better now than ever before. So one thing that keeps us going when we feel like we're up the creek is a sense of hope, a sense of hanging in there through the hard times, believing that we'll get better and working on making decisions to see the best in our partner. So we need to foster that sense of optimism about our marriage, believe in ourselves and believe in our future together. If we've had a tough weekend, which we all do, we can say to ourselves, instead of, oh, haven't we got a disastrous relationship? We could say, hey, you know, I was really tired over the weekend and I did get triggered. You can own up to things, that things weren't the best. We're in COVID, we're stuck at home. We're not doing so well at the moment, but to have that longer term perspective of we can work through this. So how do you highlight the highs in your relationship? That's what I want you to think about between now and next Tuesday at 11 o'clock when I see you again. How do we highlight the highs in your relationship? Can you list the ways that you can gain a fresh perspective? What decisions can you make to take action and be different? Next week, we're going to look at how we can be intentional, setting our goals for future to truly elevate our well-being and have an impact not only on our own wellness, but the wellness of others. So I'm going to finish here with a quick story of what happened to me quite a few years back. And it illustrates a point that I want to make at the end. I was swimming I was doing laps in a pool, and I came across, just before I did my tumble turn, came across this guy motionless on the bottom of the pool. And I got really scared. I thought, oh my gosh, he's dead. And so in my mind, I quickly thought, come on, Heather. The two thoughts that went through my mind, like he had his face up. I could see his face and body, but there were no bubbles coming out. So I thought, oh my gosh, he's dead. The two thoughts, can you believe it, that went through my mind in that split second were, come on, Heather, you know your CPR. But the second thought was, oh my gosh, he's so good looking. He's so stunningly attractive. I can't touch him. So I hurtled him up with my foot. Hurtled him up. He was really close to me. I went to do CPR, mouth to mouth on him. And he came to suddenly. And it was so embarrassing because you know what? He was an opera singer, and a very famous opera singer. And he was doing his breathing exercises so that he could reach the high notes. He was developing his lung capacity in order to reach the high notes. Now, I tell you, he was really grateful, so grateful for me that he even gave me a free ticket with our whole family to go and see his opera. But the funny thing was, you know, I thought about that later, and I thought, here's a man don't try this at home. But here he was, Jose Cabo is his name, if any of you are into opera. Here he was, developing his lung capacity, going to extremes, in my opinion, to develop his lung capacity in order to reach the high notes. I want to ask you all now, what extremes do we go to in order to reach the high notes in our marriage, in our relationships that we value in life? What extremes do you go to? Have fun and creativity in discussing and thinking about the extremes that you want to go to. Lots of love, and see you next Tuesday.